Are you a fan of mind-blowing stories, hilarious memes, and thought-provoking discussion? Look no further. Our channel is your one-stop destination for all things. Be prepared to laugh until your sides ache as we showcase the funniest and most entertaining posts that have taken the internet by storm. Hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you never miss an epic moment. What is something you've heard someone say that actually left you speechless? Story 1. Was at a small, awful diner that's gone now. Two older couples were at the next booth over talking about how one couple was trying to sell their house. They were complaining that no one would want to buy it since a black family moved in next door. The other guy said, "It's simple. When you're walking in the yard with potential buyers and you see the neighbor, ask him how the flowers are coming along this year. They'll just assume he's the gardener." Hell, that's messed up. That's asinine. Dare I ask what state this was in? In my great state of Pennsylvania, I live in a community that's almost 50-50 split black and white. It honestly makes me happy, and I thought things were all hunky-dory. Well, I started talking to this old white lady who always sits on his porch with no shirt, baking in the afternoon sun. It's always this type of guy, isn't it? His porch directly faced a side lawn across the street of a home owned by a black guy. We live right next door to the black dude. He was nice. We met him a couple times. He worked for the municipal department, and that's all we know. Well, black dude wasn't great about mowing his lawn. That's okay. We weren't great about ours either. We're all young, working hard outside the home, busy. Old shirtless white guy, remember him? Once proudly told me that he chastised his young black neighbor for neglecting his lawn, calling it there's a word here I can't say. It is the big one, the N-word, lawn. Nope. He said those exact words to his neighbor and was proud of it too. Well, black dude up and left. Just never came back. House became repossessed, grass grew, door got ripped off its hinges, windows smashed, inside of the home filled up with mold. The entire lawn has been dug up and is now a mud pit in attempts to place sump pumps and salvage the home. Work has been moving very slowly. I don't like people. What the hell is wrong with people? And just because of that one word, this guy decides to leave. I don't blame him. But the house becomes in a much bigger state of disrepair than before. Why not help the guy? Maybe he can't work because he's too busy working to mow his lawn. Story 2. I once, during what they call a mental health crisis, called the non-emergency doctor's number at around 3 a.m. After speaking to them for a little while, they said the doctor would call me back. 45 minutes later, I got a call from the doctor. I explained that I was desperate and wasn't sure what I would do if I didn't get help, and that I was so afraid I couldn't make it to a hospital on my own. The new antidepressants I'd been put on were making me hallucinate, and so terrified I hadn't slept in a few days. The doctor replied, "If you can't get to the hospital, that's not our responsibility. You could call an ambulance, but you doing so would be a waste of resources, even if you do plan on unaliving yourself if you can't get immediate help," and hung up the phone. That doctor should have his license revoked. The whole point of being in mental health practice is to keep you alive, no matter what that looks like. Please know that you are worth saving. Good luck with your journey. He probably thought it was the hypocritical oath rather than the Hippocratic. Oh man, welcome to the brave new world of dealing with mental health professionals. If you say black, they tell you it's white. If you say help me, they say forget you. If you say non-emergency, they say acute. The weird thing is that if you swore you were fine, she'd have sent the cops to bring you in kicking and screaming. And you wouldn't get out until she says you have been cured. Knowing best is what they get high off of. I have seen some videos of people who are using rideshare, Uber and Lyft drivers as transportation to the hospital, and unfortunately, these people in their state aren't the best behaved, and Uber drivers don't have to put up with that. Why deny an ambulance ride if it's going to help? It's impossible to understand. Story 3. Okay, I posted this a couple times before, but to this day, I still have to just sit and think for a minute every time I remember this. It was 2014 or so in college, and I had a statistics class. We worked in groups, and I always had this other girl at the table with me. Didn't have much of an impression of her because we didn't talk much. But randomly, one day, she asked me what I thought of legalizing weed. It took me back because I really hadn't talked to her much up until this point. Plus, it's a loaded question, even if we were in college. All I said back was, "Well, I don't see much wrong with it," and tried to leave it at that. She comes back at me and says, "I definitely think it should be legal because the THC kills off brain cells. So if it's legal, that means more people will smoke it and everyone will get more dumb. Then, because I'll choose not to smoke it, everyone will become dumber than me and it'll mean I'll become more successful than everyone else." I literally could not respond. I don't think I ever talked to her again, nor did I want to after that. Dumber. Did she really use the word dumber? The question is, how does she spell dumber? Not only that, but they admitted they were wrong to make a policy against kneeling, but refused to mention Kaepernick by name in the statement, probably because of pending litigation. Now, there is a study, or several studies, showing that while the brain is still young and still developing, that weed can have a detrimental effect. But after 25 or so, I think what you do is your own business and it's not going to have long-term harmful effects. Does this person make this same kind of argument with people who drink alcohol excessively? Story 4. I work with a woman who is very difficult to get along with, to say the least. Her oldest son is about 11, from a previous relationship, then his younger brother, who is 7 or so, who was fathered by the man she's currently with. The oldest son has very high-functioning autism, and also happens to have a large fascination with insects and insect-related fields. I remember once I was closing down the store I manage with her and told me this tidbit of info about her oldest son's fascination with insects. I admitted that while I'm not fond of insects myself, that it was neat that he liked them so much, and that if that fascination is fostered properly, he could use that to his advantage and become a great biologist, or whatever it's called when you specifically study insects. It's a big field, and he could leave a huge mark on it, like Temple Grandin did for cattle production. She looked me straight in the face and said, "No, bugs are disgusting and he's weird for liking them so much. His brother likes normal things. Why can't he like normal things?" I almost cried, dudes. I wish this was a "that happened" post, but it's not. She just flat said that stuff to me. Needless to say, I and everyone else at the store I manage really dislikes her. Entomologist. That's the science bug specialist's name. Story 5. Honors chemistry in senior year of high school. Working on our final project, needed to add NaCl to something. Girl spends 10 minutes tearing lots of potentially dangerous chemicals off of the chemical storeroom shelves because she can't find a beaker with NaCl. I point out the box of table salt and say, "Let's use that." She berates me for being so stupid to think to use table salt, except that's literally what she was looking for. I still don't know what to say to that one, except that now she's a surgeon. Well, she's got the surgeon's arrogance. That seems to be the only real qualification. Scary thing is, you're more right than you should be. Mom's an old nurse and told him many doctors that were bone stupid and should have unalived more people, but the staff usually caught their mistakes. But they never admitted a mistake. To be fair, table salt contains anti-caking agents and often iodine, so it's not exactly the same as NaCl. But if that's what she was thinking, she would have said, "No, that's not pure salt." If that would have even mattered for that experiment rather than calling you a dummy. Story 6. My great-grandma recently passed away. While we were all walking by the coffin and crying and mourning, my grandpa, her son, says to my crying grandmother, "This'll be us too next." I just turned and stared at him with my mouth open. Who the hell says that to his mourning wife within earshot of all the family and 2 feet away from his deceased mother? People grieve differently. He's trying to come to terms with his own mortality. This isn't that bad. He's insensitive at most. I can appreciate the idea, but the question was something that left me speechless, and it did. I'm sure I left some of my relatives without words when my grandfather perished. I was maybe 12 at the time. For some reason, I got a hold of those sugar stick fake cigarettes, mimed smoking them when everyone was viewing the body, like pretending to puff out smoke and all. That's coming up on 20 years ago now. Still keeps me up at night from time to time. I can sort of understand he is insensitive, though. I don't know how the wife would have reacted to that kind of thinking, though, if he just said that out loud. Maybe he's trying to face his own mortality. Maybe the wife is not. Who is that one stranger that you never forget? Story 1. Well, I guess I forgot about him in one way. I was in a motorcycle accident where a car swerved head-on at me, and I took a major blow to the head. Thankfully, I always wore a helmet, so that took 95% of the blow, but I was still understandably very shook. I barely remember getting hit, and then bam, I was just lying there on the ground, almost blacked out, drifting from consciousness to unconsciousness. And this dude in a company van pulled over, asking what the hell was wrong with the car that hit me, since he saw it all happen. And the dude ran over to me, helped me up to my legs. I remember falling over once after he picked me up, and drove me to the nearest hospital in his company van. It was only a couple of blocks away, so no need to call an ambulance. I remember crying and repeatedly saying, "I'm so sorry," for no reason. Something in the brain obviously fried from the fall. And then I noticed my arm was bleeding all over his seat, which made me say sorry even more, and he laughingly said, "It's okay, the company will pay for that." Then we arrived, and he took me to the ER and waited with me for a doctor to come. The doctor checked me up, took the helmet off, which I still wore for the whole trip, which is very important until a doctor can make sure it's fine to take it off, and made sure I wasn't seriously hurt. Meanwhile, the dude that helped me is still sitting in the waiting room for me. I took a couple of x-rays because my arm hurt a lot, but it was just a hairline crack in my bone, so nothing major. But this still took like an hour to get the pictures developed. After that, I was free to go, and I saw the dude still sitting there, waiting for me. And not just that, turns out directly after he left me with the doctors, he drove to the accident scene and took photos of everything for insurance purposes, and also called the police. He also propped up my motorbike against a nearby wall to protect it from more damage. And then he went back to the ER, waited for me, and then texted all pictures and information to me. And he also said he'd witness in case the woman that hit me tried to pull something legal against me. And then he drove me home and helped me into bed. The dude literally took 3 hours of his own time when he was supposed to be working and helped me with everything instead. And I never even got his name. Big ramble, I know. I've just never talked about this before. My memory was so hazy from the concussion, but it all came back when I started writing this. The apologizing and laughing and stuff post-accident is a shock. I have been in an accident before on a bicycle, and I was pretty injured, and I had nobody like that helping me, just people standing on the side of the road. This person should have been really rewarded for the time that he spent to cover everything for this dude. Story 2. 7 years ago, my girl and I broke up. Being in my early 20s and having the audacity to think I'd met the one true love of my life, I felt like my world was crashing around me. A few nights later, I went to a local bar by myself to try and straighten my head out with a fifth of bourbon. The bar's patio almost always gets full at night, and the only open seat was at my table. A pretty little blonde girl walks out, looks at the seat, smiles, and says, "Hi, how are you?" Sits down and starts smoking. We end up making small talk, which leads to me spilling all the overly personal junk that rational people don't dump on a stranger at a bar. I even remember crying at some point, but she wasn't weirded out or put off. She didn't judge me. She just listened and interjected occasionally to hear more details to get a better grasp of the situation. After an hour of losing my cool, I regained composure and ended up getting to know her. She had gone through a failed engagement about a year prior and was not doing fine. Told me I'd be fine too, in time. Told me she was now doing fine. At about 1 a.m., after about 4 hours of talking about life and all the awful stuff that come with it, she looked at her phone and said, "Oh man, I gotta go. You take care, you hear? You'll find your happiness, I promise." And left before I had a chance to get her phone number or even her name. I became a regular at that bar and have been back easily over 100 times in the past 7 years, but I've never seen her again. Obviously, I know that failed relationships are far from the end of the world, but it really stuck with me that a person would take all that baggage on herself to make a complete stranger feel better, even if only for a moment. I really don't ever expect to run into her ever again at this point, but every time I go to that bar, I scan around and kind of hope she'll be there. Thank you for sharing. I needed this right now. There's always something special about something fleeting, something we don't know if we'll ever see again. I'm pretty sure this guy went back to the bar really hoping that the cute blonde would come back, but if he's been around there like 100 times, I hope he's found that place to be a base where he can go and relax and enjoy the rest of the day instead of commiserating over an awful time. I'm glad he found a place. Story 3. A couple friends and I went to the beach and got a hotel room, and then things got kinda awful. People started arguing about little things about the trip, effectively just making the whole mood of this mini vacation go to hell. So I wake up first, go get breakfast, and decide I'm gonna enjoy my time, so I go down to the beach and just start collecting seashells. That's when I saw her. She was walking back and forth, reading a book. She had those cut-off jeans and this bright green t-shirt and had the fullest, brightest, and long red hair. She kind of had a sad look to her face, though, and it was just me and her standing in this cove of the beach. So I decided to go up to her and ask if she was okay. When I talked to her, her face lit up, and her smile, it simply just took my breath away. She told me she was okay, just deep in thought, and gets that kind of look on her face. We laughed, chatted for a bit. Being the awkward 18-year-old I was, I said I'd get back to collecting my seashells and let her enjoy her day. About 5 minutes later, she came up to me with a seashell and said, "This one's pretty. I think you should have it." And there was this melting smile again. We walked on for a bit, talking, and then went our separate ways. If there was ever a story about the one that got away, it was probably her. I don't even think we told each other our names, just kind of collected seashells and made small talk. But I'll never forget the way she made me feel. I wonder if this girl was secretly waiting for this guy to ask her name. Might not have been. Maybe it was just one of those interactions where she was kind of glad that it was just what it was. With that long red hair, maybe she's got guys asking for her name all the time and she was just glad for a change in conversation and situation. Story 4. Was in college. Was starting another fall semester. Had a new job, but no place to live after being scammed by some people I had arranged to rent a room from before returning from an internship out of state. I was off work at 5 a.m. and had nowhere to go and just sleep. So I decided to drive to Louisiana, which was about 45 minutes away, and do something. Ended up at a casino. Decided to go in with $100 and a pack of cigarettes. Learned to play craps. Table got hot for the other players. One guy in particular was playing $1,000 bets while I'm just doing the $15 minimums, trying to learn the game. Big money ended up making about $12,000 over the course of my dice rolls. I lost my $100 after gaining some, but losing out. I started to leave. The guy catches up to me before I make it out and asks me if I'm okay. Noticed I was real tired and frustrated looking. I just tell him I'm having a hard time, don't get specific. He slaps $200 in chips into my hands and tells me to have a better night and thanks me for the luck I brought him at the tables and just leaves after patting my shoulder. I cashed out and had a deposit and first 3 months of rent paid up on my new place by the end of the next day. If you're out there, dude, thanks again. You were my hero that day. Heck, that year. I just hope I can do something like that for someone one day. Holy hell, I cannot fathom giving someone that kind of money. What a guy. Parents, what's the most ingenious thing you've had to punish your kids for? Story 1. Oh, man. Mine set up a sort of trading hub at school. We still have a discount shop in town, the 99p store. These days it sells some real junk, but a dozen years ago and more, it had all sorts of bankrupt stock bargains in there. Sweets, drinks, you name it. My kid would save his pocket money, take a large knapsack, and stagger back under a humongous load of stuff. I remember the Powerade, 99p for a six-pack, and all this stuff would be clandestinely sold at school, undercutting the school shop along the way. He got caught, of course. I think the bubblegum was his downfall. It got stuck to everything, and inquiries were made. So it all went quiet for a few weeks, and then I got home from work and my wife said, "Mr. Shine Jr. has something to tell you." And there was the kid with the guiltiest hangdog expression you ever saw. "I've been excluded from school for a week." "What for?" "For selling my stuff." "You've been continuing to do it? You silly sod." "Oh well, it's not the crime of the century, but don't do it again, you hear? They'll be looking out for you." And then a crafty look came over his little face. "That's okay. I can get my third parties to do it for me." "Your what?" Too young to know the word distributors, but it turned out that he'd worked it out himself, that it was easier and quicker to pass bulk stock over to other kids and let them sell it for him in exchange for a percentage. Punishment was a minor stoppage of pocket money, as I recall, so nothing too serious, partly because at this point I cracked up and started laughing out loud instead of playing the outraged parent. Could have been worse. Could have been Walter White crystals. I've done this in high school. My locker was like a little gas station. I'd go to Costco and buy huge Stride and 5-gum packs, energy drinks, sodas, chocolate, candies, and I made a huge profit. It paid for my lunches for the whole year, plus extra pocket money. The hall monitors kind of knew, but never snitched on me. Those were the days. Dude, these are business people. Maybe the distributors... It depends on how this kid was treating the distributors. If he was going to go the way of turning the whole thing into his own private little pyramid scheme MLM, then maybe he deserves the punishment. But, man, I really hope these people get encouraged to be good, responsible business people. They know how to earn a living for themselves. Story 2. Worked at a group home for a few years. During chore time, we always struggled to get a kiddo to volunteer to help clean the kitchen. But all of a sudden, one of our teens volunteered and was in there for about 30 minutes wiping down counters and sweeping. She did a great job, and I know we took turns poking our heads in. Seemed legit. I'm working a double, so meds and bedtime comes, and she gets to bed with no issue, and then I start to wonder what's going on. First, she's volunteering to do the kitchen, and now she's in bed on time. I called her out to go get her meds, since she rushed off to bed. Under her covers? Peanut butter crackers, Cheez-Its, fruit snacks. She comes up the stairs again to her bedroom and sees me in her doorway. I tell her I know she took snacks from the kitchen and gave her the speech about asking for food and she'll be given it. She doesn't need to hoard it. I then asked her why, of all the snacks, she took the common ones, though we'd just gotten Oreos, Scooby snacks, trail mix. She told me that she knew we kept track of the stuff like that, and she thought she had a better chance of getting away with it if she took the awful snacks. I could not let her finish them because it was late and she had had her meds, and 9 other kids would have lost their cool if I let her. But she got to finish them as snacks the next day while everyone else had cookies. Wow. Kind of smart to try and go for the stuff they weren't going to really take a look at. Does this kind of sound like she might have some kind of eating disorder, that she really had to sneak something? I mean, she knew they were the awful snacks, and it seems like she needed anything to fill the void of hunger. Either she was really hungry or maybe she does have a disorder. Story 3. Not me, but a work colleague told me this brilliant story just yesterday at lunch. Apparently, his son was always getting in trouble in school for being a smart mouth, joking around, and just kind of being a general jerk. School was calling and sending letters to him a lot. The son always said it was other kids pulling him into it. The teachers didn't like him, etc., etc. But my coworker knew his son well enough that this wasn't the case. Said he tried punishing him in various ways, but like a lot of kids like this, once they get away from parents, they act differently. So one day, he takes him to school like normal, but parks the car and gets outside instead. The son, suspicious and surprised, asked him what he's doing. Coworker says, "I know you're having so many problems in school with teachers and other kids, and I believe you. So I want to find out what's really going on. And I'm going to do it by sitting right behind you in class. And not just your first class, but every class. And tomorrow, the next day, and the day after that until I can see what's going on." He planned to take a week off from work and had got permission from the school, who thought this was an excellent idea to make this work. He said his son lasted 2 classes before he begged him not to come anymore. Coworker left, and he never had any problems with his son after that. Son graduated and is a functional member of society. Only acceptable form of helicopter parenting. I've seen this in a few movies. I think Uncle Buck, it was said as a threat. But that is very effective. I mean, I'm glad someone was able to take off of work. It's basically just putting time into your kid's development. And once the kid sees that this person means business, they just straightened up really quick. Story 4. My daughter is 5. She gets mad at us because her candy is carefully monitored. No more than 3 pieces per day and no candy after 6 p.m. Well, she decided to start hoarding candy whenever she could. It started off simply enough. A mini Twix under the pillow, a couple of mini Snickers hidden in the sock drawer. My wife found the ones in the sock drawer while getting her clothes ready for the next day, and I found the ones under her pillow while tucking her in. She pouted for a while, as expected. Then she seemed to stop. Now, any parent out there can tell you, kids don't just stop without some kind of breaking point. I knew something was going on when she didn't ask for candy on a Saturday. I convinced my wife to take the kids to the park and started searching her room. The brilliant little brat had a stash I couldn't believe. Several mini candy bars taped to the back of her closet, a mini Twizzler rolled up in the inside of a pair of socks, a Ziploc of jelly beans taped to the backside of her dresser, and a couple of mini Reese's cups tucked in her earring box. The one that surprised me the most, though, she took my box tape and stuck a bunch of nerds to a piece of it, then stuck it to the underside of her bed. Just 2 feet of captured nerds stuck up under there. Some of the tape just had colored dots on them where nerds had previously resided. Apparently, she would peel it back a bit, pull a few off, and stick it back up there. Needless to say, the candy was put up high, and we handed her what she picked out from then on. The nerds on the tape, though, That is both genius and disgustingly unsanitary. Story 5. Not a parent, but rather the story is about me. When I was in high school, the school had an automated phone system that would call your house saying which periods you had missed. Some days I could get home and answer the phone or delete the voicemail the school had left without my parents being the wiser. But not every time. One day I had skipped school and came home to 2 very angry parents. I was told the school had better not call one more time or my butt was going to be receiving a boot injection by my father. So I did what any high school kid who was chasing girls instead of going to school would do. I called our telephone provider and had them block the school's number. It worked for quite some time, probably 4 months. The only thing, I got caught because my parents were wondering why they hadn't seen a report card in a while, so my dad went to visit the school. The school then told them I had a number of report cards that weren't signed and returned, which made him inquire about my attendance since I had been doing so well. The school told him my attendance was garbage, so he had some investigating to do. My dad came home, talked to my mom, and they called their phone provider and realized I had indeed blocked the school's number. I never even got in trouble. They thought it was hilarious. My parents still bring it up 15 years later.
Please like and subscribe if you made it this far. I hope you'll enjoy the rest of the video and have a wonderful day.
People that host their home on Airbnb. What has been your worst experience with a guest? Story 1. A friend of mine rented to a girl who was convinced that there were cameras hidden all around the unit. She dismantled the lighting fixtures, picture frames, medicine cabinets, remote controls, etc. On a side note, my sister and her fiancé stayed in an Airbnb that really was full of cameras. They found out because the owner texted them almost immediately after they exited the seemingly private indoor hot tub and not yet returned the lid before they even changed out of swimwear, which they luckily chose to wear. She was obviously immediately horrified because they were clearly watching them. Airbnb apologized profusely and gave their money back, along with providing a free hotel their last couple of days of the trip. But still. Edit. They found a lot of cameras throughout the house, including bathrooms and bedrooms. They never thought to even look. It was the first time they'd ever vacationed without real adults. I have a story along these lines, though not Airbnb. This happened about 35 years ago. I had a friend who was a member of a church. He and his girlfriend got a place to live, a converted shed, that was offered to them by one of the ladies that went to their church, also a devout Christian. The shed adjoined her home, but had been fitted out with a bedroom, toilet, kitchen, etc. Well, they were there for a couple of months. They had decided to wait until they were married, but in the end could not help themselves and one night had physical intimacy for the first time. The next day, the lady owner told them they had to leave because they had spicy time before marriage, and that was a sin. They said, okay, but then the guy got curious. They'd only done it for the first time last night. How did she know? After examining everything, they discovered she'd placed a microphone under the bed. I told him to call the police, but he didn't want to cause trouble, so they left. And they did get married a few months later, and as far as I know, are still married today. I found it hilarious that she considered premarital spicy time a sin, but listening to someone in their bedroom was fine. The movie License to Wed has a plotline identical to this. I thought it was contrived, but I guess this actually happens. I think this is not a story that is just limited to Airbnb. There are people who have legitimate concerns for making sure they have proof that their property is being treated right or ill, but there are some people that just go beyond it and are trying to force their own will on people living their own lives. It's been going on for as long as people have the ability to rent out property. Story 2. Rented out to a group of 4 girls. Turns out they were going partying every day during their stay. I get called one day at 5 a.m. It's the guard from my building telling me there's a passed-out girl in the lobby's couch, puking and peeing herself. None of her friends have gone back to help her. Ruined the couch, obviously. The next day, they sent me a message again. Another one of the girls had sprinted to the building's stairs and also peed herself. I was a messy drunk for 4 years at college and never peed myself. None of my friends did either. What the hell were they doing that meant they were peeing themselves so much? Do some freaking Kegels, ladies. I worked as a bartender in a beer-only bar for a few weeks. Lousy pay for 60 hours a week. A woman was on her first day, and she was drinking porters and stouts with a high alcohol content all night. She had at least 6 to 8 beers. The girl was making out with a date, and suddenly she passes out and pees herself. We had to clean that up and give her alcohol to smell to wake her up. It was a mess, and she was like 35. I worked at a bar, and there were a couple in their 30s that had been dating for a while who were regulars. They would come in and hang out, but inevitably after several drinks, they would start making out at the bar almost nonstop. It was really weird, but they were both nice and tipped well, so it just went on like that for a year or two. It was a small place with a lot of regulars, and most people just got used to it. Yeah, drinking can always lead to interesting situations, but it really gets fuzzy when it happens on property that someone else is responsible for. I can really sympathize with someone who has to specialize in cleaning up pee, as that can really damage stuff. Story 3. Not my story, but a friend of mine. He has an apartment in London, an urban area with dense houses and population. The apartment he hosted has this window facing Main Street, which people tend to assume is non-see-through, but it's not. So the guy who stayed in it decided to sit in front of that naked and had a few beers, overlooking the great view. He must have fallen asleep or something, and everyone passing by the road just had to see this poor creature. It was all on Snapchat at the time, I recall. Edit. This is really blown up, so let me clarify a few things. The area I refer to is in the context of where the apartment is, and not the whole of London in general. In that sense, the population per square kilometer here would be extremely high. He sat on a couch, right in front of the see-through window to have his beers, just like anyone would do. The window used to be non-see-through until it had sustained some damage from a nearby construction site, forcing them to repair immediately without thorough checking. This is where the whole new feature of see-through was born. Thanks. I kinda like that guy's style, though. Plot twist. He knew exactly what he was doing, and it was just some weird spicy thing. Yeah, no way he wouldn't instantly notice his mistake upon the first bystander staring back at him. So your dog was talking junk about that guy's girlfriend and then asking you for weed? One hell of a dog you've got. That was before the dog pooped itself, too, and then marked its owners down for cleanliness. All right, I was going to comment about the whole story of this guy sitting in front of a window, but what are those 3 comments about the dog? Where did that come from? Just out of nowhere, I thought he was calling the guy a dog for just behaving the way he did, but where did that come from? Maybe we'll find the story later on here. Story 4. I'm embarrassed to say that I was not the host in this story. Me and my mate went out on a pub crawl in Prague during our gap year. I don't enjoy clubbing, and the last venue on the crawl was a club, so I cut slightly earlier than my mate. Around 1 a.m., I got back into our apartment and went to bed. I was woken up by my friend at 4 a.m., and the entire kitchen was flooded. Not even exaggerating, there was like a freaking inch of water lining the floor, spewing rapidly out of a broken overhead pipe. I asked him what the hell happened, and he claimed he had woken up standing in it. Being unfamiliar with the house, I didn't know where the choke point in the pipe was to cut it off. We called the guy who owned the place, who was painstakingly slow given the time, We managed to get through to a family member who then contacted him. He arrived about 15 minutes later, in which time the water issue had become even worse. We had sealed off the room using a heap of towels to minimize the water leaving the kitchen as it had tile floors, while the rest of the house was hardwood. But this made it accumulate to about ankle height. The kitchen also had a sunken floor. Up until about 6 or 7, we were using pots to clear the indoor swimming pool from what used to be the kitchen. It didn't look like it had done a horrendous amount of damage once we were finished, but I imagined the water seeped through the floor and into the walls, causing all sorts of damage. What makes it worse is that it was a third-floor apartment. What a nightmare. How did the host respond to that? Hopefully he had insurance for such a serious issue. Did anybody else gasp audibly at the phrase, "tried to do a pull-up"? Story 5. A guy I worked with told this story, how he hired a maid through a referral from his friend. She was great, apparently, and asked to stay there a couple of times when he was gone. After he agreed to let her stay a few weeks when it wasn't being rented, however, she ghosted him. He ended up calling the cops, and they checked up on her. She was there, and although nervous, everything seemed normal. She later got a hold of him and asked to stay longer. He said no, clean it, and get out. He comes back randomly to his house at 5 a.m. a few days later to someone sleeping in his downstairs room with dirty dishes and cigarette butts everywhere. Ends up, this maid's an H-addicted husband. He had been using it as a flophouse and illicit substance den. This guy escorted the husband out by gunpoint, pantsless. The place was trashed downstairs, but apparently perfectly clean still upstairs. His TV was stolen, but the husband brought it back and left it in the driveway so he didn't get charged with theft. Apparently, there was little he could do about the free stay the husband took advantage of. Reminds me of the plot of the movie Parasite, minus the H in stolen TV. That movie was fantastic. If you like that, watch Forgotten, 26 Years, and Mom, all Korean movies. Now, the title on my script reads, "What did that shrew do you attend your wedding?" And I'm going to assume that this is going to be about women behaving badly at weddings that are possibly related to whoever's in the ceremony. Let's see what we've got. Story 1. I have a couple, unfortunately. My first marriage didn't go very well. At the wedding, I had a rented tux on, and I asked my new wife not to smear cake on me when we cut the cake because of that. Of course, when the time came, it wasn't just a cute smear of frosting or something like you'd see at most weddings. Oh no. She plastered me with cake and a mess of frosting and food coloring. I don't know what was worse, being angry and hurt and embarrassed when the whole room was watching, or when people were pulling me aside later and apologizing for it when her and her parents were still laughing and making jokes about it a couple of hours later. I thankfully remarried a great person years later, and we had a small ceremony that was really nice. Our photographer was taking pictures afterward before we were heading to the reception, and I had been talking to my dad when he started, so he just took our picture together first. My mom, being who she is, was incensed by not being first to get her picture taken when she wanted and proceeded to throw a fit and leave. My parents had been divorced for at least a decade or so prior to this. Maybe a couple of minutes later, we were all lining up and getting family together for pictures, and when I couldn't find my mom, I learned that she'd stormed off and left. On what would otherwise be one of the best days of my life, there will always be that storm cloud of pettiness that she left behind because she couldn't handle putting one of her kids ahead of herself for 10 minutes worth of her time. And there, right there, is an illustration of exactly who I don't want to be. Deity help me, I hope I'm never like your mom. It's sad that this person's weddings were besmirched not once but twice. I was not expecting any of these stories to involve the bride. I wonder how long that wedding lasted, or if the guy just asked for annulment right then and there. Story 2. By the time of our wedding, my husband's 33-year-old sister was still single, and she hated that her younger brother was getting married first. How did she deal with it? by trying to sabotage my wedding. The night before our wedding, she got drunk-faced and, while ugly crying, told my husband that it was supposed to be her wedding and it wasn't fair because she'd be able to plan a much better wedding than ours. That would eventually prove to be false, as she finally got her on-again, off-again boyfriend to propose by giving him an ultimatum. We had a small, elegant outdoor wedding at a mountain lodge, and my sister-in-law convinced some family members on my husband's side that the dress code was casual. So they showed up in jeans, t-shirts, and hoodies. I was beyond upset with them for readily taking my sister-in-law's word without double-checking with us. Luckily, my photographer was sensible enough to exclude them from the pictures as much as possible. At our reception, she went around complaining to our guests about how cheap our wedding was. My husband's side is used to those typical church and banquet hall weddings, and ours was way different. But still, it's rude to just dump all over someone else's wedding at their wedding. The lodge had a hot tub on the property, and near the end of the night, when people were starting to leave, she changed into her bathing suit and chilled in the hot tub. This was planned ahead of time because she thought about bringing her bathing suit there. My husband and I don't really talk to her anymore. Yikes. Also, what kind of idiot turns up to a wedding in a hoodie? Even if it's casual, surely you want to look good. I think that's on the people there who did not check with the bride and groom. I mean, you just don't take someone's word for it. That is just awful. I mean, sure, the bride and groom are going to be busy, but that just doesn't make sense. That was awful. Story 3. My mother. My significant other and I ended up doing a courthouse-type marriage. Did the papers, found someone to marry us, went to her office to do it. The only people there were my ex-stepdad, I call him bonus dad, mom, aunt, uncle, and grandmother. My mother was my maid of honor, and my bonus dad was my SOS best man. Right in the middle of our vows, my mom breaks down sobbing, interrupting everything. The shrew is obviously trying to get the attention of her since she can't seem to stand not being in the middle of everything. We try to continue over her sobbing, but only starts crying louder. My aunt, being the amazing person she is, grabbed the ring from my mom and pushed her towards my uncle, who pretty much dragged her outside. Aunt quickly announced she's the maid of honor now, which I was completely fine with, and the vows carried on. After signing everything, we go out to get to the car, and my mom is just furious at me for letting your aunt do that. I just ignored her and went to the car. On the upside, when we were saying our vows, bonus dad started tearing up. It made me happy because it was super unlike him. Kind of guy who never says, "I love you," because that's just him. Ex-first sergeant, served from 1972 to 2007, manly man. I love you, bonus dad. Curse you, mom. I'm amazed by how many moms carry on like this. It's nuts. It's amazing that the bonus dad or the stepdad was more closer to this wedding and closer to the people and behaved better than the actual mom. That is just awful how she just tried to steal attention like that. Good on the aunt for getting her out of there. Story 4. My sister's wedding was a bit over the top, but beautiful. Castle, south of France. Need I say more? She had this group of friends who all put some money in an envelope as a present. One girl, the new girlfriend of one of the boys, said something like, "I don't have a lot to give and feel embarrassed to put my participation in front of you." So she took the envelope in the loo and added her money there, away from judging eyes. Yep, you guessed it. She took more than 500 euros from the envelope. They only found out when one of those friends asked weeks later if the newlyweds had enjoyed the 1,000 euros during the honeymoon. The girl's excuse was that she was planning her own wedding and could just afford a city hall affair, and it was so unfair my sister had such a great venue. I'm personally quite immune to Princess Wedding Day, but stealing money at a wedding is so wrong. I think the girl ended up as a castaway. My sister's marriage didn't last anyway, so I don't know what happened to her group of friends, but I often think of this girl and imagine her as one of life's constantly unhappy and envious. No way! I hope they called the dang cops on her. Story 5. After the ceremony, we were taking group pics with both families. After a couple of pictures, my mother-in-law starts walking around loudly proclaiming, "Can we get a picture with just the close family, please?" My husband and I were like, "Sure," but then she kept saying it over and over again, until finally I realized she wanted a pic without me in it, but was just being passive-aggressive about it. So finally I'm like, "Do you want me to move?" And she's like, "Yeah, that would be great. I've been meaning to get some family pics done, and this is the perfect location." Continues to get a million pics of her, she's my husband's stepmom, her kids and their families, and my husband and his brothers while I'm just standing off to the side awkwardly. Then comes Christmas. She had the audacity to send my parents a Christmas card using one of the pics of just them from the wedding with a little "from our family to yours" line. This on top of the million other things she's done to be awful. I cannot stand this woman. I would have later requested that the photographer delete all those photos, but I'm also super petty about that stuff. If you're paying, you decide. Story 6. Not a shrew. A runt. Little guy with a big mouth was a really close friend until at my wedding, he stood in front of my mom when we were cutting the cake and proceeds to give her the finger when she asked him to move over a little. Just after that, while my dad was taking photos of me and my wife cutting the cake, he keeps nudging my dad's arm so he would get a shaky photo. My dad gave him a swift elbow to say frickin' stop, then said runt stamps on my dad's foot. My dad loses it, pushes him out the door to my father-in-law, who then pushes him further outside to his brother, who is a big guy and an ex-bouncer, picks him up by the collar and slaps him around the face a couple of times and drops him on the floor. Cops were called because he wouldn't calm down and had a night in the cells. I don't speak to him anymore. If you're reading this, Ricky, you are a runt. The dad-in-law combo pleases me. Family unity. It's not just girls that are jealous of all the attention. Unfortunately, there are some guys like this too. Hopefully, the family unity combo that got the guy out didn't make a lot of noise when the cops finally hauled this jerk away. Managers. What made you fire an employee on their first day? Story 1. Not a manager, but when I started working at Walmart, we had a group orientation of about 10 people. There was an older husband and wife duo in my group. The guy kept saying that this job was big for him. He'd ask a million questions, wanted to go over stuff that is self-explanatory, and he'd just wear you out by listening to his senseless dribble. Go on and on about nothing. We had to take some basic customer service training on computers. You watch a short video and answer 4 or 5 questions. You cannot fail these because they literally give you the answers. I hear this 40-plus-year-old man calling his dad during our break. "Hey, Dad, things are going well. I just got 100% on the test." The test being 4 or 5 true or false questions. He then asked his dad when he was able to pick them up. I just felt bad for the guy because he didn't really seem all there in the head. The group trainer sits us down and tells us about how the schedule works. The guy starts freaking out. "I can't work Wednesdays," like he wouldn't stop. He started asking random managers who had nothing to do with scheduling, let alone managing the new hires who aren't even officially in the system yet. He would not let up. Any manager he saw, he'd go up to them and talk their ear off about how he can't work Wednesdays. He ticked off the wrong manager because he asked about his schedule 2 or 3 times in the span of 4 hours. The managers pulled him aside, wrote him a check for 4 hours of work, then told him to leave. They fired him and his wife quit right after. The sad part is that it seemed like this minimum wage part-time job at Walmart really mattered a lot to him. I'd hate to imagine how he had to explain what happened to his dad. This one made me feel a bit sad. I'm wondering if there's some actual mental issues that this person has. And in that point, I would say he's kind of in a better position. He's got a wife, he's got a place to stay, and he's actually anxious about getting a job. It didn't seem like he was being berated by his dad for finding work. He was actively looking. I think there's a little more to this story. I don't think it's just some guy who's just clueless. Story 2. Not a manager, but I did floor training at a department store. New employees spend their first week watching videos and doing training exercises. This was her first day on the sales floor. I got an email that they were sending me a new person to train. She isn't in dress code and not wearing a name tag, so at first I didn't realize she was an employee, until I saw her behind one of the counters, sleeping on the register, and the HR lady talking to her. HR asked her if she'd like to keep her job. The new girl said yes. HR gives her another chance, but has the camera guy watching. As soon as the HR lady leaves, the new girl crawls under a table of jeans and goes back to sleep. I'm guessing this was in a blind spot for the camera because she took a nice long nap. At this point, I have other work and didn't want to train someone who wasn't going to actually work. I was hoping Sleeping Beauty would wake up and I could show her how to do the new inventory tracking tagging that I was teaching the other employees how to do. No such luck. She did walk up to the counter. I'm starting to introduce myself. Sleeping Beauty took one of the fancy chocolates we sold and began eating, walking away without speaking to anyone. The HR lady came back and walked her out as she was throwing the wrapper on the floor. Just get a good night's sleep before work, I guess. But with the whole thing of her throwing the wrapper on the floor, it just sounds like she really didn't want to be there or she didn't care. What do you think? Did she just come from a very rich family, or did she just have a bad attitude? Story 3. I manage an IT team. Had a 35-year-old lady come work for my team on contract. Basically, temp works through an agency. I gave the agency the job description, and they were supposed to send me someone who matched. This lady shows up for her first day and talked a good game. But when I show her the workspace and start talking her through how to navigate from one server to another on our system, I find she types like my 70-year-old mother, hunting and pecking so slowly she could probably only do 10 words a minute. She even used caps lock instead of shift for uppercase letters. Literally, caps lock A, caps lock, etc. Watching that for 5 minutes made up my mind that this person had inflated their resume to get the job and really had no idea what they were doing. Quizzing her a little more in depth about her IT knowledge showed she was in way over her head. I had to tell her it wasn't going to work out because I needed someone to jump in with minimal training and hit the ground running, and that I didn't think she would be able to do that. She immediately started bawling her eyes out, telling me over and over how bad she needed this job until she left. For our technical sales jobs, I would give a typing test. I didn't need fast, but, well, you could only type so slow and survive. And one guy who was otherwise great promised to come back in 2 weeks, able to type with more than 2 fingers. He did, and he got a job. I have always heard about the principle. This was as far as the 80s, about the Peter principle. You just sort of get to the highest point of incompetence you can, of you're able to. I mean, you're just incompetent. You just work your way up until the position where you're incompetent, and that's where you'll stay. And that's why everyone seems so incompetent in what they're doing. So let's take a look at some more jobs where people weren't even confident enough to get to entry level. Story 4. Assistant manager at a Goodwill. People can work off community service time at Goodwill, and the local high school has a policy where if someone was caught with tobacco products, they had to do 5 hours of community service. Not sure if that was for a first strike or the specifics, but I do know I had a buttload of teenagers working for me. Best job ever, except for the pay. Half my time was spent assigning work to kids, then chain-smoking cigs out back and checking up on them and the regular employees every so often. Anyway, this kid came in wearing jeans and a bad attitude. Halfway through his shift, which involved sorting through donated clothing, I noticed he's switched pants. He now has on a bright red pair of pants. Neon freaking red. I know they were donated earlier that day because they caught my attention. Asked if he stole them. He denied it, of course, and claimed he had been wearing them all day like I wouldn't have noticed his bright red pants. I punched his little time card thing and told him to leave. His mom called later to chew me out. He only has 3 days left to get his 10 hours of community service finished, blah, blah, blah. Offered to just buy the pants. Told her no, obviously. Story 5. I managed a property for a very wealthy couple for a few years. The property was huge, and there were workers for the landscaping and then others for all the animals. It wasn't on this guy's first day, but maybe the first 2 weeks or so, but I caught him smoking outside the barn where the horses were. Smoking wasn't the issue. It was where he smoked that was. He was smoking right beside where all the hay and shavings were kept. When I asked him what the heck he was thinking of smoking there, his response was, "I thought it was okay because it's not inside the barn." I told him, "It's even worse. At least the barn has a rubber floor and isn't a massive pile of dry hay and shavings that can easily go up in flames with any spark. The hay in the shavings area was attached to the barn, and the barn was all wood, so it could have easily been a disaster. I had to let him go. He wasn't the brightest and was often left alone because there was so much work, so he would often be alone, and I felt uneasy with that. That being said, we're actually still friends, and I helped him get his next job. Oh, I'm glad this one had a happy ending."
Please leave your story in the comments. I would love to make a video on them in the future. Also, don't forget to like and subscribe.